defendants here, along with counsel for both sides. Everybody ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, jury's absent. Sheriff, bring the jury in, please. Good morning, folks. Show on the record, please, Carrie, that all the jurors are present. We appreciate you being here. Appreciate your service. I believe we'd finished the last witness, Brian Davis, yesterday, and Ms. Holder, you ready to proceed with your next witness?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, the state would call Raymond Boyer.
Okay. So, Ms. Boyd, is the Bible right there? If you take your oath, please. Okay, great. Thank you.
I do solemnly swear that the testimony you give this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You may proceed. Thank you.
Sir, would you state your name, please?
Raymond Boyer.
And Mr. Boyer, where do you live? What part of the country?
I live in Texas,
Okay, and what city?
Richmond.
And back in July of 2011, were you working at a Home Depot in the Richmond area?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. It's actually Katy.
And are Katy, Texas?
Katy, Texas.
And Richmond, Texas, close in proximity to one another?
12 miles.
And what was your position with the Home Depot back in July of 2011?
I'm what they call an associate in the garden center.
Okay. And what does that involve?
It's customer sales.
Okay. And the garden center, does that cover just plants, or are there various?
It's power equipment, barbecue grills, cleaning materials, and then all your plant soils.
And the Home Depot, what's the address? What street?
Uh-oh. It's on Fry Road and 99. I don't know the exact address.
Okay, but it's got a Fry Road address?
Fry Road and 99, Grand Parkway.
Okay. With regard to July of 2011, you indicated that you were working at the Home Depot. Do you remember a particular time where law enforcement officers came and questioned you about a purchase made from that location?
I remember them coming in. I don't remember the exact date.
Okay. And do you recall that the law enforcement officers that came to talk with you were from the Raleigh, North Carolina area?
Yes, ma'am. If I recall, there were 2 from Raleigh and I believe 2 Fort Bend County detectives.
And do you recall if they asked you whether or not you had any recollection of someone coming into that Home Depot and purchasing muriatic acid?
Yes, ma'am.
Is muriatic acid, is that one of the things that's kept in the garden area?
It's kept in outside gardening close to the pool chemicals.
And what is muriatic acid? When people come in to buy that, what are they typically buying that?
They're typically buying it for their swimming pools, and then we have some contractors. I'm not sure of the exact use, but I think they use it in construction with concrete and things.
Your understanding they clean concrete with it?
Mm-hmm.
And when the police officers came and asked you if you had any recollection of an individual coming in to purchase muriatic acid, did you recall that someone had asked you about that about a week prior? Do you remember that it was a week before the officers came in that this person had come
Yeah.
in?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the officers ask you to tell them about what had happened with regard to that purchase?
Yes, they did.
And did you at that time sit down and tell them everything you remembered about that purchase?
Yes, I did.
With regard to that day, can you describe for the jury how that interaction began with regard to the muriatic acid?
Yes, ma'am. One of the other associates at Home Depot brought this customer to me and said he needed help with some odor removal products. So I took him to the cleaning aisle and was showing him the different things that we have to remove odor. And he said, well, no, he needed something stronger. And he told me, what he told me was that he was down visiting relatives and that I think a son had a wild hog or something that was in a pen, and that they had let the hog go. I don't know what happened to the hog, but he needed to clean the pen. And what I explained to him was I didn't have any chemicals there that would knock that hog odor out, that I had 2 children that had come up through the FFA, or Future Farmers of America. We raised hogs, and the only way to get rid of that odor was to dig those pens out on a weekly basis, get rid of that dirt, put fresh dirt in. And he didn't want to hear that. He basically said, well, don't you have an acid or something that I can use? And I said, well, the only acid I have is muriatic acid, but that's not going to do it. And then he was real adamant about seeing me taking him to the muriatic acid.
Okay. And so his, when he approached you, he was primarily concerned with getting the odor from this pen. Is that what he related to?
That's what he related to me, yes, ma'am.
And basically what you told him was he needed to change out the dirt.
I tried to sell him a shovel.
Okay. And what was his response when you tried to sell him the shovel?
He wanted to see the muriatic acid.
Is he the person that actually brought up the muriatic acid?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you try to talk him out of that purchase or that avenue?
I did. I tried to sell him a shovel.
Okay. And at that point, once you were unsuccessful in selling him a shovel, what happened?
I took him outside the muriatic acid.
And what happened when you got to the muriatic acid?
He said he wanted to get some, so I told him how many, and we loaded his cart.
What do you mean you told him how many?
Well, I asked him how many did he want, and then I put them in his cart.
Mr. Boyer, the jury has seen previously in this case a jug of muriatic acid.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe the muriatic acid that you sold there at Home Depot, kind of how it came?
Yeah, it comes in a box of 2 one-gallon containers of muriatic acid per box.
And this person that you assisted and spoke with that day, did you later find out that his name was Grant Hayes?
I did later, yes.
And so you had asked Mr. Hayes how much muriatic acid he needed, and what was his response?
If I remember, I loaded 4 boxes.
And so 4 boxes, that would have been
8 gallons.
8 gallons of muriatic acid?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you say you loaded him, did he have a cart with him?
He had a basket, a shopping cart.
And so you assisted him in loading that muriatic acid
Yes,
into the
ma'am.
cart? Did you suggest, or did he indicate that he wanted to see any other items after he got the muriatic acid?
Well, he wanted a trash can, which was just 1 aisle over, so I took him over and he picked out a trash can and we put that in the basket.
And did he indicate to you what he needed a trash can for?
No, he just said he wanted a trash can.
And was there some discussion about some gloves?
Well, yeah, I told him if he was going to use that muriatic acid, he might want to use some gloves and take precaution not to breathe that stuff.
And Does Home Depot sell gloves that are specifically for use with chemicals?
They
such as
do.
acid?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you give him any direction about what type of gloves he needed to purchase?
I showed him the gloves that we had, and the neoprene type gloves is what he wanted, and that's what we put in the basket.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Boyer, I'm handing you what has previously been introduced into evidence, being a photograph, which is Martin State's Exhibit 203. Do you see the item that's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, ma'am, that's it.
And what do you recognize that item that's depicted in the photograph?
Well, it's just a long cuff neoprene glove, rubber glove.
Okay. And is that the packaging for the type of glove that you assisted Grant Hayes with?
At that time, yes, ma'am, we don't sell this anymore. I mean, we sell another brand, but that was the one that we had at that time.
Now, may I publish State's Exhibit 203
You may.
on the large screen?
You may.
Mr. Boyer, State's Exhibit 203 is now on the large screen, the photograph that you have in front of you. You've indicated that that's a long cuff,
Yes, ma'am.
and what does that mean?
That means the glove will come up to about here on your hand.
And I know it's been described as neoprene, but is neoprene a type of fabric?
It's a rubber type of plastic, yes.
And do you recall if these were black gloves that neoprene?
They're black, yes.
And this is, some of the packaging indicates cleaning / chemical series.
Yes, ma'am.
And so these specifically are sold by Home Depot for people that are looking to deal with, as you indicated earlier, acid or some heavy-duty chemicals.
Right.
Did, after you assisted with regard to the trash can and the gloves, did Mr. Hayes ask for anything else?
No, ma'am, that's all. I just helped him in our department, and then he went out elsewhere in the store.
How long would you say that this interaction went on between you and Mr. Hayes?
15 to 20 minutes, probably closer to 15 minutes.
And you indicated that he left the area. You had assisted with the loading of the acid, the purchase of the gloves, and the
Trash can.
Have you had a chance to see the video from the checkout regarding Mr. Hayes?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, and that's previously been introduced as State's Exhibit A100. Your Honor, may I publish just the view from the checkout of this?
All right, you may.
Mr. Boyer, at the top of this video, do you see a cart being pushed with an individual with a trash can inside of it?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And is that Mr. Hayes that you assisted on the state back in July?
That's the cart, and I can't really see him in that picture there. Looks like him.
Okay. And are you able to see the timestamp on this video being 7/19/2011 at 11:22?
I can't see it, but I'll take your word for it.
During the time that you dealt with Mr. Hayes there in the Home Depot, was he alone? Was there anyone else with him?
Yeah, he was by himself. I didn't see anybody with him.
at this point, Mr. Boyer, Mr. Hayes arriving at the checkout counter and unloading that basket?
Yes, ma'am.
Now that the trash can's removed, can you see some brown cardboard boxes?
Yes, ma'am, that's a muriatic acid.
And the item that was just placed on top of that, did you know what that was?
Well, it looked like, I'm sure it's the gloves, I can't really tell.
He's leaving the frame at 11:25. Again, I don't know that you can see 'cause it's in the lower corner. Mr. Boyer, is that the only contact that you had with Mr. Hayes, what you described here?
In my department, yes, ma'am.
And did you have any interaction with him outside of your apartment, anywhere else?
No.
And with regard to information, would you describe him as pretty insistent on the purchase of the asset?
Yeah, he was very insistent, yes, ma'am.
And that was despite you telling him that would not assist with the problem that he posed, which was an odor issue related to hallways.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Questions?
Yeah, yes, Your Honor, just a couple of things. Good morning, Mr. Boyer.
How you doing?
While Grant Hayes was in the Home Depot, he only bought one pair of neoprene gloves, didn't
To my knowledge, yes, sir.
he? And you, I believe, were in his presence for a total of about 15, maybe 20 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Did you notice how calm he was?
Well, he was pretty calm, but he was very insistent, yes, sir.
What he was insistent on was getting the muriatic acid.
He would ask me, yes, he asked me what I recommended for his problem, and I told him, and he didn't, after he asked me and I gave him my advice, he didn't want that advice. He was insistent on that acid.
He knew what he wanted to.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boyer. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Call your next witness, please.
Now, at this time, the state would call Dr. Paul Stimson.
Okay. Well, you need this item. You need that item?
No, sir.
Okay. Doctor, if you'd be sworn, please.
Sworn to the testimony you give this court, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
Ms. Hart, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, would you state your name, please?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Paul G. Stimson, DDS, MS.
And Dr. Stimson, back in July of 2011, how are you employed?
I'm retired, but I was consultant to the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences as a forensic dentist, and also occasionally to the Galveston County Medical Examiner as a forensic odontologist.
And can you describe what a forensic odontologist is?
A forensic odontologist is an individual that takes dental records, dental information, and processes it for the courts and law enforcement agencies. The biggest job that we do is identification of unknown remains, These are remains that usually are terribly decomposed, perhaps have been burned terribly in a fire, markedly disfigured in a automobile accident, and so it's impossible for the next of kin and such to look at these individuals and make an identification. So we use dental records before death and after death, take radiographs of it, and make an identification. This is the principal job. The other things we do are child abuse, spouse abuse, look at dental trauma and figuring out is the trauma consistent with the story and these sorts of things. We also do bite marks where one individual bit another, or perhaps a caretaker bit a child, or a child bit another child. And so using bite marks, you can't unequivocally say who did the bite mark, but sometimes you can say, of these three people, these two obviously didn't, or these three obviously didn't. And the last thing we do is what's called standard of care or malpractice, where a dentist may do something that's ethically wrong, or put in 5 fillings, for example, and charge the federal government or the patient for 8. And so you look and compare dental records. And so this is basically what a forensic odontologist does.
And for how many years did you occupy that position as a forensic odontologist with the Harris County Medical Examiners?
I started in 1968, and last June just terminated my contract and gave up my dental license. Long time.
And during that time period and prior to that, did you have the opportunity to teach in this field?
Yes, ma'am. I taught general and oral pathology at the University of Texas Dental School in Houston for 32 years, retired as a tenured full professor, and taught at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. for 30 years in forensic dentistry. I've taught at the Southwest Symposium. We're going to have our 21st symposium. I've taught in every one of those. I've lectured in Europe and Canada, Mexico, South America on the forensic odontology. So I'm considered an expert in my field.
And have you had an opportunity to testify in court before and render your opinion with regard to forensic odontology, or specifically dealing with the identification of remains?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
And has that been going on over many, many years that you've had those opportunities?
Yes, ma'am. I've testified in Harris County numerous times as part of the homicide investigations on identification of unknown remains that we finally got the records and made it. It's, you know, they use DNA too, but the video television shows you can do DNA in 30 minutes. That's not true. The best you can do if the lab really hustles is 4 or 5 days. Give me a set of dental records before and after death and I can get it to you in 15 or 20 minutes.
So it's a quicker identification process.
The key is you have to have the before death records and a name. If you have those to compare to the unknown decedent, then it's a fairly quick procedure.
Now, at this time, the state would tender Dr. Stinson to the court as an expert in forensic odontology.
The court accepts the tender. Thank you.
With regard to, you indicated that you had served the Harris County Medical Examiner, worked in conjunction with that office as a forensic odontologist, and I think you mentioned that you also have had an opportunity to work with the Galveston County
Yes, ma'am.
office. And how would it come that you would also work with the Galveston County Medical Examiner office?
Well, the way that you are contacted and do this, I had a contract with Harris County. And when they would call, the investigator would call and say, we have a forensic identification case for you. And so when the investigator calls, this has been approved by the medical examiner who's doing the case. Each medical examiner has their own case under the supervision of the chief medical examiner. And so they would then call you to come and assist them. When the Galveston County, there's a chief medical examiner there, and to authorize me to examine the body and the fees and so on and so forth, they give approval. And so you always go through the chief medical examiner, receive approval before touching any unknown bodies in a morgue situation. You have to have permission and be authorized to do this.
In July of 2011, did you receive a request to identify remains from the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, ma'am. I was called by two detectives, one from North Carolina and one from Fort Bend County, and said that the individual whom I'd trained previously that was doing the cases for Fort Bend County was out of pocket, and would I help them do this dental identification? And I said I would be most happy to if they could contact the Galveston medical examiner, get his permission, and then I would gladly do the case for them. And this is exactly what happened.
And at that time, was the Galveston County Medical Examiner, was that Dr. Postelnik?
Postolnik, yes, ma'am.
And did you shortly thereafter receive information that that had been approved, that is, for you to work on this case under the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office?
One of the detectives called me back and said, we've talked to the chief medical examiner and he's authorized you to do the case, yes.
At that point, did they indicate to you that they had a known set of dental records for you to examine and make the comparison?
They either had them or they were going to get them shortly. They had them with them, or they were going to be transported to them, and they would have them at about the time that I did the examination. They said, we will have the records of the known individual for comparison.
So on July the 26th of 2011, did you actually undertake to make the comparison at the Galveston County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe the process whereby an examination or comparison is made? What process you go through?
Well, the examination usually, you ask for and gain permission to take photographs. The photographs of the case actually belong to the medical examiner and are part of the medical examiner. If I want to take photographs for my own teaching material and such, I ask for and am granted permission to take photographs. After you take the photographs, then you visually identify what kind of material that you're going to be working with. The Galveston County Medical Examiner has a digital x-ray equipment. You do, or I do, first a visual examination looking at all of the fillings that are in the teeth and charting. I fill out a regular dental chart of what is present. It's called a postmortem after-death chart of the fillings that are present, what kind they are, where they are located and such. Maybe I'll take photographs of that with permission. Then the next thing you do is you go ahead and take radiographs just like you would for a patient in the office. Try to duplicate the radiographs or x-rays that you're going to get from the dentist who's done essentially the same. So you try to make the comparison of the decedent essentially the same as the kind of examination that would be done and the radiographs that would be made in a dental office.
And do you recall when you went to conduct this examination as to whether or not the victims or the remains of the skull was severed from the rest of the body, or pieces?
Yes, the only thing I worked with was the skull itself.
And do you recall whether or not all the teeth appeared to be present?
My records show that there were 2 or 3 teeth that were what we call avulsed or lost, but the majority were there. When you have a tooth in your mouth, it's held by small little, they're fibrous tissue, and you can actually move your teeth. Mother Nature makes it as a shock absorber, so your teeth will move a little. You can actually crush walnuts with your teeth, but you're going to have pain first and you'll stop. So this is what's called a single-rooted tooth, like a front tooth or an eye tooth. The back teeth have multiple roots. So in the front, when decomposition occurs, these little fibers that hold the tooth decompose and the tooth can slip out very easily. So it's imperative that we go back to the scene and look for the teeth that have been lost, or in the specimen container, whatever. The nice thing is now that I work with the medical examiner in Houston, they have 3 forensic anthropologists, and they do the job for me. I used to have to go out and do it myself, back on the scene looking for teeth, and but they do come out easily. Most of the teeth were present in the specimen, yes, ma'am.
And the teeth that you indicated that they come out easily, if there were loose teeth, did you undertake to replace those teeth in such a way that you could then take the radiographs?
Yes, ma'am. What you do is you use a little dental soft wax and put soft wax around it and put it back in the socket and take a radiograph of it to see that it fits. It may look like it fits, but radiographically, when you put the tooth back in, it may not exactly fit the socket. It may be one of the other teeth. And so you always use soft wax, because if you use super glue and glue it in, you're stuck. If it's the wrong tooth in the wrong socket, you're stuck. So yes, we do this on numerous occasions.
And so you indicated that you were able to, in this case, working with the skull that had been recovered to actually take radiographs.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the two teeth that were missing at the time that you went through and did your radiographs, which teeth were they?
I show that the number 7, which would be the maxillary right lateral. I show the maxillary right central was exfoliated. And then I show that the mandibular right cuspid was exfoliated.
And did that impair you in any way in making an identification?
No, there's enough information in the other teeth that you can overlook the missing teeth. There's enough information in the remaining teeth that you can make an identification.
And you've indicated that you went ahead and charted the teeth and then took the radiographs or x-rays.
I took my digital radiographs, yes, ma'am.
And did you receive information with regard to the dental records of Laura Ackerson?
Yes, ma'am. These were brought to me by the detectives, and they were furnished from an office here in North Carolina. The dentist of record was Dr. Ricky Carlisle, C-A-R-L-Y-L-E, 206 Airport Road, Kingston, North Carolina, 28501. And what they gave me were his office records, copies, printed copies of his digital radiographs, and I think there was what's called a Panellips, which is a radiograph of all the upper and lower teeth in one picture. I think I recall seeing one of those too.
Your Honor, may I first witness?
You may.
Stimson, I'm handing you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit A245, A246, A247, and A248.
Yes, these are the copies of the office records of a patient, Laura S. Ackerson, Ackerson. It has the various dates, what was done for her. There's an appointment and a payment record. Usually, I don't use that too much. I'm not interested in what the dentist charged or when the patient did or did not. I need this for the guts of the record. Here's a picture of the panel lips, the upper and lower jaw that I mentioned to you that received. These are taken for impacted wisdom teeth and other problems, fractures, things such as that. And then these are the standard dental records that a dentist would take on you as part of your chart. And so he furnished these for me. I go through with the unknown and take exactly the same kind of of radiographs so that I can compare the two.
And you used A245 through A248 in making your comparison in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, the state would move to introduce into evidence A245 through A248.
Let me received.
And again, Dr. Stimson, that you indicated that was the record for Laura Ackerson that was provided by Dr. Carlisle in Kinston, North Carolina, his office being in Kinston, North Carolina.
Yes, ma'am.
And after getting those records, doing your charting and your digital radiographs, were you able to make a comparison between the remains found and provided to you with regard to the known dental records of Laura Ackerson?
Yes, ma'am. There were enough consistent points in both records that I could say this unknown individual is the skull of the records as reflected in these reports, which is Laura S. Ackerson.
And as part of your conclusions and that opinion that the remains that were provided to you belong to Laura Ackerson, did you provide a written report of that to Dr. Kostilnik, the chief medical examiner?
I verbally told him and then went home and wrote a report and mailed it to him shortly thereafter.
So your examination was on, I believe you testified earlier, July the 26th,
Yes, ma'am.
and then on July the 28th is when you reduced that to writing and provided that.
That's when I wrote the written report. Yes, ma'am.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Stimson, I've handed you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit A256. Do you see that?
This says A258
I'm sorry,
on,
A258.
yes,
For
ma'am.
that amount of time. A258.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that?
This is a copy of my report to Dr. Pozlnik.
And is that the report that you prepared in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
You know, at this time, the state would move to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit A258.
Let me received.
And with regard to the final paragraph of that, can you read that out?
Opinion, comparison of antemortem and postmortem exhibits reveals concurrence in sufficient detail to establish they are from the same individual. There were no irreconcilable discrepancies. It is my opinion, based on reasonable dental probabilities, that Galveston County Case PA 2011-280 is Laura Ackerson as portrayed in the records of Ricky Carlisle, DDS, 206 Airport Road, Kingston, North Carolina, 28501, furnished to me by the two detectives mentioned above. I verbally notified your office prior to leaving the premises.
And after providing that report orally and then following up with a letter to Dr. Postilnick, were you asked to do any further examination, or was any other question presented to you with regard to this case?
Yes, ma'am. I have received a call from Dr. Postilnick stating that it was his opinion that there had been some acid etching in certain of the teeth in this case.
Can you explain what is acid etching?
If you use a strong acid, the hardest tissue in the body is enamel. Next hardest is bone. And if you use a strong acid, you can demineralize it or actually take the calcium salts out of the bone and leave just the protein matrix behind. And so demineralization would be when dentists do fillings, one of the things they'll do is they'll acid etch inside the filling so that there's a ragged area so that when they put the filling in, the filling will attach to the ragged area. So we use acid etching as part of the practice of dentistry, but in this case, this would mean that someone had put acid on the tooth or the tooth had been placed in acid and it etched or took away some of the enamel.
Had Dr. and I said Postilnick, am I pronouncing his name wrong?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Dr. Postilnick had contacted you specifically about some information that muriatic acid may have been used in this case.
He called me and said, I have a tooth and there is some acid etching on it. If you're down this way, because I live about 70 miles from Galveston. And I said, well, I have some business down that way to go and see my hygienist, which is 40 miles away, and I'll just stop down and examine the tooth with you.
And on August the 9th of 2011, did you have the opportunity to actually go to the morgue and look at the tooth?
I went to his office, the morgue is in the back. I went into his office, and at that time, he produced the maxillary left central incisor, number 9, for us to look at.
And you pointed to the front tooth, one of the front teeth?
I pointed to my own maxillary left central incisor.
Okay. And when you got to Dr. Postilnick's office, did he actually produce that tooth for you to look at?
Yes, ma'am. He had a specimen jar, and he opened it and put the tooth in my hand. Looking at it with the naked eye, you couldn't see that there was that much acid etching, and so he said, here, there's a 100x magnification lens. As a pathologist, I looked down the microscope, and so I used this and looked very carefully, and also using my fingernail, you could feel just a slight indentation in it, so there was a minimal amount of acid etching on the tooth. And so slight depression, and so I said I agreed with his opinion that there was acid etching on the facial or frontal portion of the maxillary left central incisor in this case.
Did you, while you were present there on August the 9th with Dr. Postilnick, did you look at any of the other teeth at that time?
No, ma'am. The only tooth he had was just number 9 in the specimen jar.
And after meeting with Dr. Postilnick, did you prepare an addendum to your initial report indicating your findings with regard to the acid etching.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Stimson, I'm handing you what is marked as A59 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, ma'am, this is a copy of the addendum that I wrote for Dr. Postelnik talking about the etching on this tooth in this case.
And you provided that to him after providing that part of the report. You provided that so it could be part of his final report, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, this then became part of his record.
Now, at this time, the state would move to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit A259.
No, be received.
Dr. Stimson, with regard to A259, could you, is that just basically a paragraph of your findings with regard to the acid etching?
There's a paragraph that describes the examination that I did, and then I conclude with, I agree with your opinion. There was acid etching on the facial surface of the maxillary left central incisor in this case. Respectfully submitted and signed my name.
And the prior paragraph that, can you report what it says there?
In a previous conversation, you had advised me that muriatic acid had been used on some of the dentition in this case. On August the 9th, 2011, I had occasion to be in the area and traveled to the morgue and examined the upper left central incisor in your present, tooth number 9. For viewing, the magnification was approximately 100x using a magnifying glass provided by you. There was visible acid etching on the facial surface of this tooth. When you felt the facial surface of this tooth with your fingernail, there was a depression caused by the acid action with a small ridge on one edge. The dental tubules could be visualized with the aid of the magnifying glass in this area.
And what are dental tubules?
The enamel is above you have the pulp of the tooth, then dentin and enamel, the hard surface outside, which is there. And so it etched down a little so you could see the dental tubules, which are much softer and do not have as much mineral as the enamel of the tooth does.
Now, may I first witness?
Yes.
Dr. Postelnik, Dr. Stimson, I'm showing you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 252, 253, 254, and 255. Do you recognize State's Exhibits 252 through 255?
These are photographs of the tooth in situ in the skull itself, and the material I examined was not the tooth in the skull itself. It was the tooth obviously taken out of the skull and just in a specimen jar. But these are pictures of the tooth in situ or in the skull itself taken previous to my examination.
And is the tooth that's depicted in State's Exhibits 252 and 255, do you see the actual tooth that you examined?
Yes, ma'am.
And you know that that's the same tooth by how?
Well, it has the appearance of a maxillary left central incisor. It's in the socket itself. I don't have a radiograph, so it may be, the left and right look, all I can see is the front surface of the tooth, and that's what it looks like.
And could you use about your testimony with regard to the condition of that tooth when you examined it, which led you to your conclusion that there was acid etching? Would you be able to do that?
On State's Exhibit 255, you can see a couple of small little areas of the indentation which you could catch with your fingernail, and so this would be consistent with what acid etching of normal enamel would look like. It would take away a little and leave these little indentations here. You can see it best on this one picture.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit 252 through 255 and ask if I could display those on the screen, not the big screen, on the television.
Let them be received, you may.
I made Dr. Stimson step down.
He may, certainly.
May I?
Yes, yes, you may.
Dr. Stimson, this is State's Exhibit 252, which is displayed here on the screen. Can you use this to explain what you observed with regard to the acid etching?
If you look at these surfaces, they look moderately smooth, right? Nice and smooth. If you look here, you can see a little highlight, but you see a little area here and a little area perhaps over here. This is the area where instead of being nice and smooth, the acid would be taken away. The best way to think about this maybe would be if you had a fingernail and you painted it with fingernail polish and just wiped it with a little nail polish remover, you'd have it smooth and then kind of a little dip and smooth, a little dip. This is kind of what you're seeing here, which is, you know, kind of a hokey way to explain it, but that's the only way that maybe it makes sense to you. So it's not smooth here. It has just a couple little teeny ridges in it where the acid has taken the tooth away. This one,
This is 253.
this one, the light is such that you can't see those areas. So it looks smooth like these. So it's just, it depends on how you put the light on the surface of the tooth to be able to see it.
This is State's Exhibit 254.
Similar here, see what may be a little area here of perhaps acid etching. You can see it here fairly well and over here.
And this is State's 255. And this is a photograph with the lighting that you're able to basically see
You
those
can
areas.
see it better, yes, ma'am.
You had indicated earlier that you had actually taken your fingernail and scraped it across the surface.
Yes.
And was that a certain part of this tooth or various?
You just would scrape, here, this is nice and smooth. And so it should run across just like on top of a desk. Here, there's a little indentation in the enamel, so it should sort of catch and catch here. So your fingernail would just sort of catch, and there's an indentation. And this is how, it's just easy to pick up that indentation.
Now, in this photograph, there are numerous teeth that are missing,
Yes,
and were some of these teeth were present at the time you did your identification?
these are the teeth that have single roots and are easy to take out. These teeth would obviously probably be in the specimen bucket. They just had fallen out and they're with it, and when they took pictures, they didn't put them back.
Thank you. Dr. Stimson, your report and opinion with regard to the acid etching was in fact that there was acid etching present, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to give an opinion as to what type of acid was involved in this case?
No, ma'am, I was just told it was muriatic acid, and that would be consistent with being able to etch the enamel. Sulfuric acid would have done it, nitric acid, dilute citric acid. Any acid would do it, but I was told it was muriatic acid, and so it's consistent with having done it.
But any acidic substance could have produced some etching, is that right?
That's correct. One of the things you see in people that, for example, suck lemons, if you suck lemons long enough, you're going to have acid etching.
You say long enough, what do you mean?
It has to be a habit that lasts. I mean, you do it 2 or 3 times a day, every day for a long period of time. The citric acid eventually is going to acid etch your enamel. One of the things that, as a dentist and oral pathologist, I've diagnosed before is in individuals that are constantly vomiting. The stomach contents, because it's acid, will acid etch the inside back portion of the tooth of the individual. And this is one way that we can diagnose it in some of these individuals, even though they deny it.
So in terms of would it depend on the strength of the acid and the amount of exposure to the tooth?
The strength, the time, and the exposure.
And in this case, the information that you had was that muriatic acid may be involved,
Yes.
and what you saw was consistent with muriatic acid.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Do you have questions? All right. Thank you, doctor. Thank you very much, sir. You want to retrieve your exhibits? Thank you. Please. Sure. we're moving too quickly, and I said we are not. But part of a trial is just the management of 100 people to come in and testify, and hopefully not that many, but a lot. And you don't know whether they're going to be here 10 minutes or 5 hours. Okay, so obviously this morning there was no cross-examination, there were no questions. So the medical examiner had just landed from, part of it too is they're bringing witnesses from Texas and from different places, and coordination is a real challenge. So the medical examiner just landed at the airport, and he will be here, we believe, by 11:15, and as opposed to calling another witness that may take 2 hours to put on and then put him on, and they have to get him back on a plane to fly back out this evening. We're going to take a little break and let y'all stretch your legs and sort of just reassemble back in the jury lounge downstairs at 11:15. Hopefully we will call and say he's here, come on back up, but if he's delayed a few minutes, you'll be more comfortable down there. You haven't heard it all. Keep an open mind. Don't form or express any opinion about the guilt or innocence of the defendant or any matter in controversy, please. As I understand it, once his testimony is completed, we have the witnesses are apparently lined up thereafter in a little be a little more easier to get to. Okay. Appreciate your patience. Give you a break till 11:15, and then reassemble back down there in the jury lounge, and hopefully we'll call you back immediately thereafter. All right, folks, we'll be in recess till 11:15. Thank you.
There's one thing that we could take. I mean, the next witness is Dr. Mambo. The pictures I intend to use are I pass over to Mr. Gaskins. I don't know if he has any specific objections to them. They're ones from the court permitted us to use in the Grant Hayes trial. With the exception of the last one, I'd like to admit and have Dr. Mambo talk about. I don't intend on ever publishing that to the jury, and that's State's Exhibit, I believe, 250.
Let me see the photographs.
Coverage.
Sure. All right, I've looked at the exhibits. You'll be heard.
I'm assuming they're going to be published on the television.
On the television only.
I think I'm actually going to have Dr. Mambo come down and point to the
Just point the photographs out, period. And did you say you are not going to use 250?
I'd like to admit it in case it becomes an issue later in the trial, because Dr. Mambo can't come back, but it is not my intention to ever publish that.
You're going to ask him to identify it. You're going to offer it without publication.
Yes.
All right. in the event it becomes relevant, you can request publication at a later time, and then I'll hear both sides on that issue. I agree that 250 would not be suitable for publication to a jury unless there was some probative value involving a contested issue in the case. All right, thank you. Let me hand these back to you. I'll just state for the record that having heard this witness previously, there are times he can be difficult to understand, and so I will allow either side to assist the jury in understanding the testimony of the witness by directing his attention by leading questions in matters that are not in significant dispute. All right, thank you very much. We'll be in recess till 11:15. Thank you.
Superior Court is in recess 11:15.